It's a pleasure to interview my friend Gary Graden, so well known everywhere. Gary is also a good supporter and honorary member of the Italian Association of Choral Conductors.
Hello, Andrea. Nice to see you, and thanks for this opportunity to participate in the interview. And I want to take the opportunity to say hello to friends and colleagues in Italy. So many wonderful colleagues, so many wonderful conductors, and how much I appreciate this initiative, your new project for the Association of Italian Choral Conductors. Such an important initiative, such an important activity, and I really look forward to following its development, and I wish you all great work and great success.
Gary, in a concert hall or in a church, a group of musicians tune the instruments. Others want the voice. In the hall, the audience sits, greet each other, read the hall programs. At a certain point, something ritual happens, something magical. One man enters through the stage and climbs onto the podium. The audience first applauds and then makes silence. He makes a final gesture, and order and harmony suddenly were born. For your experience as choir director, can you describe how important dedication, attentive listening, and empathy are?
Now to your questions, Andrea. In your first question, you speak about dedication, about attentive listening and empathy. Of course, they're very important. Dedication to our work, to our art. I also like the word devotion, like adoro te devote. You know, devotion to our art form and devotion to our place, to our people, to our singers, our performers, and to our audience. It's extremely important. Attentive listening. I think of this two sides to the question of attentive listening, that our singers and players are listening attentively, wide open, in the moment of the performance, listening, hearing, and at the same time, it's so important to understand that the audience is also active in their listening, very attentive, following the sound, following the music, following the poetry, the text. I'm struck so many times when we perform the Passions of Bach in our churches, with many hundreds of people following the textbook, with the text of the Passion, following the progression, you know, following the texts and this Passion story, and at a certain moment, all the audience turns the page, and there's this storm of page turning, and you think, yes, that doesn't disturb me somehow. This page turning, I'm reminded then that everyone is really following. Everyone is active in our listening and active in the participation of this event, of this performance. It's nice to be reminded of that it is a process for the performer and the listener together, a very strong and important group dynamic. And empathy is very important. How I feel as a leader, as a conductor, how I can sense and understand the needs of my singers, of my performers, of the performers that are surrounding me, and also empathy for our audience. What can I do as a leader to create the best possible infrastructure, the best possible conditions, so that the music can sound and the music can be can have an honest performance, expressive performance that can be understood and be appreciated for what it is without unnecessary distractions. So I agree with you. These are very important dimensions of what we do as conductors.
In the course of your career, what have been the most significant encounters that have given an imprint or a change to your artistic life?
For starters, I sang in a boys' choir in a small town in New England in the States, and that has left an indelible print stamp in my life. It was we were just sort of simple country kids singing in that choir, but the conductor was a wonderful leader, and he had such high ambition for us. And we studied all the great, or much of the great repertoire in choral music, and that has left such a strong imprint on me, and of course influenced the development in my life. I remember having some courses at the university when I was older, taught by some beautiful professors who were so passionate and so taught with such conviction and passion that I was very it was very contagious. I was somehow deeply affected by that, and I felt that this is something I would like to continue these studies in music history and music theory. So I think of people's passion, how important that can be. When I came to Stockholm, then I had the opportunity to come into the sphere of Eric Erickson, both to study with him at the academy and to sing in his choirs. And that, of course, was a huge influence in my life that has continued, throughout all the years. Early on, during my time in Stockholm, I had the opportunity to sing in a professional vocal ensemble. We were a male quintet with countertenor, 2 tenors and 2 basses, and this was a fantastic experience for me. 5 men singing great and interesting and in some cases very difficult repertoire, and I had to be responsible for my voice part. No one else could help me. I had to be my own leader. And also we talked so much about intonation and tuning, and we're always practicing one voice on together with 2, then 3, and for always building, and always this wonderful sense of how we can, through intonation, through our tuning, create a body of sound. It was a marvelous experience for me, and I know singing, particularly in ensemble, has really influenced my work as a choral conductor. And then, of course, I had this marvelous opportunity to teach at the Stockholm's Musikgymnasium. This is the high school liceo for choral music in Stockholm. I was there for many years, and I started the chamber choir at the Musikgymnasium, and those years were also so formative and so important to me. So these were some parts of my background that really influenced my life.
Where and when did your passion for music and choral singing come from?
And what about my passion for music and choral singing? It came from my childhood. My parents were the children of Swedish immigrants to the United States. And of course, they celebrated their Swedish heritage when we met regularly with our family. We had quite a large family with aunts and uncles and cousins, and there was always music and dancing, and the music was a way to celebrate and preserve our Swedish heritage in the States, to create or to preserve, to celebrate our heritage. And part of growing up in a Swedish enclave, you could say, was going to church in our small Lutheran church in where I grew up, and in the Swedish Lutheran church, of course, in the tradition of Luther, there was a lot of hymn singing. So I sang in a children's choir, and we sang always in our services. So I would say early on, as a child, that was when my passion for singing started. My mother was also a beautiful singer, and I think my passion for singing and choral music was the continuation of her passion, and probably my life's path has been, in a way, what she might have wished for herself had she lived in another time, had other opportunities.
What were the most demanding, riskiest projects you have carried out? How did they take place, and who did they involve?
I can think of particularly one very risky project, and this was when, this is in rather recent time, it was almost 9 years ago, when I moved from St. James Church, also St. Jakob, to the cathedral, in a new position that I had at the cathedral. And part of my responsibility, having moved to the cathedral, was that I would perform the Messiah. And this was a huge tradition in the cathedral. And my predecessor, who had been in the cathedral as the conductor there, he had been there for 44 years and had done 142 performances of the Messiah. And then now suddenly it was my turn, and to come with my choir, my orchestra and soloists, and to do it in a completely different way. And so I was actually quite nervous about all of that. It won't be the same, I was thinking, and how, could they ever enjoy this, or what will they think about this performance? And so for me it was quite a big risk, and it took me a lot of concentration and preparation. But interestingly enough, it was very appreciated, and I think perhaps I even at that time underestimated the audience. Underestimated an audience that they also like and are interested in variety, that they could, in fact, really appreciate a different interpretation after so many years of this tradition, and so many years of this performance. And now was something completely different, and they loved it. So that sort of brought to light the fact that I don't ever want to underestimate an audience. Really trust an audience that they can appreciate what you want to say, no matter what you want to say. If you do it honestly and if you do it in your way. So that was an interesting experience. And another big risk was when almost 20 years ago we performed in my choir, the St. Jakob's Chamber Choir, which is an amateur choir. We rehearse one time a week, like so many other choirs in the world, and we decided to perform Schnittke's Psalms of Repentance, and this is unbelievably challenging work and very difficult and, of course, incredibly powerful and expressive music. And we studied so hard. And it was a risk, I think. But the choir really appreciated the challenge. And they worked, individual rehearsals, and they studied themselves in a way that they rarely do. And it was a great, great learning experience. So through these difficult challenges, through, setting the level as high as we dare, that we can learn from these opportunities. So those were two of the bigger risks that I have had in my life.
Gary, you deal with choir conducting and teaching at many workshops and courses. What tips and advices do you want to give to young directors to face the daily difficulties of this activity? What do you think are the goals to achieve that can make a director truly excellent?
Maybe I'm thinking more of the tools that we have that can make us better conductors. The list is long, of course, of things that we can use, the things that we can help us in our work. I've thought of just a few things that I want to mention. And the one thing that comes to mind is the image of the potter. The potter sitting at his wheel with the wheel rotating, and there's a ball of clay, and that clay, it's the job of the potter to mold that clay, to take water, to dip your hands, with firm and strong motion, reach into that piece of clay, and then to begin to form it, to mold it, to build it, to lift it upward. I use this image a lot for conducting and conductors also. This image of lifting with steady and firm grip, steady and firm hand. And I think that this is an attitude, what we can keep with us as a vision, an idea, a picture, as we work with our choirs and our ensembles, that we are forming, that we are molding with firm hand, smooth, steady flow of energy, building, always building, always supporting. It reminds me of another idea that I use, that I share with colleagues and friends and students, is that I much prefer the yes words than the no words. In other words, I think it's not interesting what, if the choir is singing, it's not interesting what they're doing wrong. It's more interesting what we can suggest to improve, for improvement, to say, to give a positive idea, to say, okay, let's do this, let's try this, let's do this, instead of saying, oh no, this is wrong, this was no good. I don't, again, it has to do with building up, forming, molding. And by the way, the potter makes mistakes sometimes. Sometimes that clay, as you form that pot, sometimes there's a blemish, sometimes there's air in the clay, sometimes there's, so what do? You just have to stop the wheel, put it together again, mold that clay, make a new piece of clay, and start again. So that image stays with me. Other words that I like, more important for me, is the question of poetry and analysis. That we should try to interpret the poetry of the composer, the musical poetry, what the composer is trying to say, what image or what picture is the composer trying to paint, what gestures, what are the ideas, the poetic ideas. And for me, this is something that I always try to keep in mind. The poetry, the artistic expression, the character of music, the feeling, the color. This is important. Of course, hand in hand with that is analysis. Poetry and analysis, that we understand, we study the music, we study its structure, we study its melodic structure, its harmonic structure. We know the details through analysis, through our intellectual understanding of the symbols of the score. But then to see beyond these symbols, and to see what's the painting, what's the picture, what's the gesture, what does it mean to us? So these somehow go hand in hand, and this is really part of our job, important part. Analysis and poetry. And of course, I think it's obviously part of this is being prepared, that we, in our work, in our rehearsals, in our study, that we are prepared, that we are efficient, and we are effective. Let the singers and players play. Don't talk too much, dear conductors. Say one sentence or two. Make one positive suggestion, two positive suggestions. Say, I'll try this, and then go back to it and work. This is something that I try to remember in my work. I try to talk less and sing and play more. And that has to do with trusting your singers. Let them make the decisions, let them be the interpreters. Also give them credit for all of their ability and their talent and their knowledge. Trust them. And another important part of this is, for me, of course, in our work with the choirs, is intonation. Have a good system and a good idea of how to improve our intonation through intelligent intonation and tuning. We create a beauty of sound in our choirs, using our voices to create something beautiful. And important in this process is our through tonal relationships, and you have to find a good system. I have a good system that I use, and that it works many times, and it's worked well for my choirs. Use that system.
You have directed many premieres of contemporary composers. What was the relationship with the author? Furthermore, does the possibility of interacting with the composer of a piece responding to the criteria of a more faithful interpretation?
Performing contemporary music has been absolutely one of the most satisfying parts of my work, and since rather early stage of my work, I had the opportunity to perform contemporary music, perform pieces by contemporary composers, and it started in Debrecen when we were in the competition many years ago, because in Debrecen it was a competition for only contemporary music. And so when we went there, we had to perform and prepare 4 separate categories with contemporary music, and including in each category a Hungarian composer. And this was a huge change in our relationship to music, and then it just continued. It's been so satisfying to perform and to be the voice of living composers who many times become friends, of course, and people with whom I have a continuing dialogue and a continuing relationship. And it's been also part of that is performing and promoting their music, because composers need us to perform their music and to promote their music, to share their vision and their creation with others. Of course, the active dialogue is perhaps the most satisfying when you have a composer nearby and you can invite the composer to a rehearsal and you can study together, you can listen and sing and be in dialogue with the composer. The composer can react to the sound and perhaps make suggestions. And this is something that is so very satisfying for me, of course, as a conductor, and for my singers. They enjoy that so much, because they too then have a relationship and are actively participating in this. So it is very important process, participating in the process in the creative process and in the performance of music of our time. This is part of our cultural, what would you say, musical imperative. It's our responsibility.
Music is utopia is a statement by the great pianist and conductor Ezio Bosso. Everyone wants to be first violin, but if everyone is first violin, then there is not an orchestra. Within a choir, what are the strategies you implement to achieve the right balance of voices, to obtain the appropriate sounds that makes a performance unique and enjoyable for listeners?
I think of two things. One is I think of the image of a pyramid when I think of the sound of the choir, and it's like maybe it also it's influenced by by performing Baroque music as well, where you have a strong, always you want a strong and colorful and the continuo, bass instruments, different instruments, and strong, powerful continuo. And then on that you build the other instruments, melody instruments, and harmonic instruments and so forth. So I think I use that principle for the idea of the choir that I like to have a strong fundament, and I build the sound from the bass up. And of course, related to that is the other part of this question, or the other answer I would give. It has to do with intonation, and I guess it's almost not quite similar exact, but there is a certain a pyramid of intonation, and that has to do with the understanding tonal relationships and understanding what is in a particular chord or combination of tones, what is a fundamental, what is a fifth, what is a third, and so forth. And in that pyramid of sound, it's something that I use then to create a body of sound. And this body of sound then helps in making more beautiful expression. As far as the question of intonation is concerned, also again, I said earlier that it's good to have a system or an idea of certain tools you can use to create good and healthy tuning in the choir, healthy tuning and intonation, because it's not guesswork. It's really, intonation is quite scientific, really, and it's good to have a clear intellectual relationship, a rational or intellectual relationship to how the intonation works, and that's not only guesswork.
When one sings, he, she reveals his or her soul. In your experience, what weight do you give to the importance of choral singing as a social value, as a creative experience for the individual singer?
When one sings, he, she reveals his, her soul. You're talking about the social value and the creative experience for the individual singer. Well, this is quite clear that in my choir, as good singers as they are, and as well trained musicians they are, the choir has a very important social function for them. Again, we meet once a week, and I've understood after these many years that this one evening a week that we have, it's like an oasis for these people. They're professionals, they're working in their jobs every day, they have their families and their various responsibilities, but our Wednesday evening rehearsal is theirs. It's their oasis of time and space, and their opportunity to be together with their friends and their choir family. And they cherish this, and they they fight for it, they demand or protect their evening for the choir. And I have understood that how important this is for them. It's important for them for this social dimension, of course. it's also an important time for their intellectual and emotional development. I think of like our rehearsals are. I mentioned this to the choir many times, that they are like a study circle. For these next 6 weeks we study a work by a particular composer, and I think, okay, here we are. It's Wednesday evening now. We go back into our study and we study this part of the piece. So we study these movements. It's like going to a museum, to a national gallery, or to a fantastic cathedral, but it's just for us. It's our private showing. And here we have the opportunity to go into like the Sistine Chapel, but not with a bunch of other tourists, but it's our own time. And there we can study. And tonight we study this wall of the chapel, and we study what's there, what's on that wall. And next week we study that wall. And then we study, so it's like such a fabulous opportunity for us all to study art and to study music, to study poetry, to be inspired by creative things, and to be inspired by beauty.
How important was Erik Erikson to choral music?
Erik was the personification, if you could say, of a huge cultural explosion, or you could say a revolution in choral music. And it happened for many reasons. Of course, it grew out of a very particular and very special choral tradition in Sweden. But he somehow embodied and personified this development, and with his choirs, particularly at the radio choir and his chamber choir, there was a new aesthetic that came in the mid 20th century, and it represented something that was completely new, and something that was so different and so attractive. And I think particularly through some important recordings that they made at the radio in the early 70s. One was called Europäische Chormusik, and the other was Virtuose Chormusik. Then there was they were able to spread this sound, this ideal, and it was these recordings were received around the world. The recordings of and documentation of so many composers, of course, living composers of 20th century, mid-20th century composers, and historic repertoire as well. And it was such a different, and it somehow raised the level of choral music to become maybe perhaps on a par of professional orchestral music, professional chamber orchestras that could play all kinds of repertoire. And particularly important was this new relationship with composers, because Erik was so important in, of course, through his position at the radio, to commission new works and to perform works of composers from all over the world, and very challenging works. So it was, again, this positive spiral in relationship between composer and conductor and choir, that the composers could could compose for a very fine vocal instrument, a very fine choral instrument, and with great satisfaction. And the choirs were so skilled that they could perform the most challenging repertoire. So it became a very beautiful and positive development and positive artistic relationship. So I think Eric's his contribution to our art was enormous, of course, and his through his teaching, through his recordings, through his work, he influenced many generations of choirs, of singers and conductors. And of course, for me, it was an incredible opportunity to live in his midst, to study with him and to sing in his choirs. I learned, of course, so much from that, and I have benefited greatly from that opportunity. So, Andrea, thank you. I've probably taken much too much of your time now, but there are some of my answers. Thanks for your interesting and beautiful questions, and I hope to see you soon. Take good care, all friends and colleagues, and hope to see you. Bye-bye.